Welcome to Channel X TV and also welcome to 2024. And I'm delighted to be joined in our first video interview of the year in partnership with Volo with Scott Galvao. Welcome, Scott. How are you?
Hey, well, yeah, doing very, very well. Thanks, and happy New Year to you, Chris, and to all the viewers out there. Yeah, thanks for having me. Doing really, really well. Had a really great end to last year, and very much looking forward to 2024.
So, Scott, you've been around the industry. I think I must have known you for something like 20 years, seeing you at various events in your previous guises.
You're
But tell
dating
us a
us,
little
Chris.
bit.
You're dating us.
Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're doing today.
Right. Yeah. As you said, I think, yeah, we've been in the industry for a long, long time. And, funny enough, the channel has never separated us, despite the fact that you're in the UK, I'm located in Germany. Yeah, I think both of us have had actually a lot to do with just European e-commerce in general. And that's where we got our start way back in, gosh, when was that? 2005 or something like that, I think is when we first met. In any case, yeah. So yeah, I've been involved in e-commerce in one aspect or another for over 20 years, or almost 20 years now. And at this point, for a year now, I've been working at Circuly, which is subscription SaaS or a SaaS model, which I can tell you a little bit more about today. But yeah, that's where I find myself at the beginning of 2024.
Fantastic. Well, looking forward to digging a little bit more into circuly. But before we do that, can you just talk about the e-commerce landscape and particularly across Europe as well? A lot of our readers are based in the UK, but are the same trends happening in Europe? What are you seeing from economy to sustainability to inflation? What's happening in Europe that you're seeing?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I think the trends are very similar in the UK to Europe, right? And that is, there's a lot of governmental changes, right? So specifically, sort of regulations are forcing companies towards much higher sort of circularity standards. But I think the economy itself, I think the individual consumer is also forcing a lot of e-commerce and just retail websites to change, right? Specifically to offer more flexibility in terms of what they offer. I think, especially in this economy, it's a tough economy, right? Retailers know that, and the retailer or the end users, not only do they want to buy things nowadays, but they also want to be able to lease them or rent them, right? If we take the example of a brand new e-bike, right? So we have a lot of customers that offer e-bikes, right? But these things, they range from like £4,000 up to like £10,000 for a really, really good e-bike. Now, I don't know about you, but that's a big chunk of cash to front up. Absolutely. Right. So something like that, especially if you're only going to use it for 6-7 months out of the year, it makes a lot more sense just to lease that at a fraction of the cost and then send it back at the end of the year. Next year, you get a brand new one. Right. So as the end, you come away a lot better in the wallet. Right. And always with the newest product. And at the same time, that retailer that offers that product, they can very easily refurbish it and then offer it to the next person and make multiples of what they would have made if they had just sold it. So,
But I think this is really interesting because the world has fast moved towards sort of the subscription as a service model ever
yes,
since Steve Jobs with his iPod stopped us buying music and effectively just leased it on your phone. And most people, when they buy a car nowadays, it's a lease purchase agreement rather than an outright purchase. And even myself, I still got DVDs. But you know what? I probably watched 20 times more on streaming video like Amazon Prime than I actually buy myself outright nowadays.
that's it.
So this is a model that people are increasingly used to. But when I think subscriptions, I've got to be honest. I normally think, oh yeah, it's a food box subscription, or it's razor blades, or
Yeah.
something that's much more consumable.
Yeah.
What are the kind of you've talked about e-bikes, but what are the types of products people are actually leasing nowadays in their day-to-day life that perhaps you wouldn't have dreamed about years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe we'll touch upon, you touched upon the development of this trend as well. Maybe we just say a few words about that as well. right? Because all, you and I and all of the listeners here, right? We've all subscribed digitally to things for years now, right? Whether it be Spotify, Netflix,
Mm.
things like that. We've also been leasing some physical products like cars for decades, right? But what's happening now is that there's this trend toward more physical product subscriptions, right? You already mentioned, right? So, food boxes, things like that, razors. But more and more, it's going into the realm of, well, we talked about e-bikes, right? Anything that rolls, we'd like to say. Anything from, we have a client who has a fleet of Teslas that they subscribe out, right? But motorcycles, scooters, bikes, e-bikes. That goes directly into the realm of, let's say, children's bikes, right? Anything that children use, right? Anybody with children out there, they know how quickly they rotate through these things. Bikes are a great example. Every 1 or 2 years, you have to get a new bike, right?
Mm.
And if you're anything like me, then you have this collection of bikes in your cellar, right? Where you can see basically as your child has graduated through the sizes, right? But what do you do with that? They still have inherent value. And what a lot of manufacturers are figuring out is that they can actually make a decent amount more money just by leasing those things out for longer periods of time, between 3 years and between 3 months and 2 years, and then getting them back and then just releasing them out or re-renting them out to new consumers. Just to give you an idea, one of our clients, long-term clients now, they estimate that they can make 5 times the amount by doing that model, the subscription model, than they could just by selling the product. So.
Well, that is really interesting, and to be honest, you've only got to look at things like car leasing agreements to see how profitable a subscription model can be.
Yeah.
But from the consumer point of view, how much sort of reluctance is there to actually lease something that you don't actually own, as opposed to make an outright purchase? And we've talked about children's bikes. When you give a child a bike for a Christmas present, how do you turn around to them in 2 years' time and say, "Oh no, sorry, your Christmas present's got to go back now"?
Right. Well, I think it's probably an easy sell with a child's bike, right? Because you can say, do you want the brand new bike that's a little bit bigger and cooler than your old bike, right? Bigger than the one that you don't fit anymore, right? So that's more of an easy sell. But yeah, I mean, I think for the end consumer, whether it be, let's say, if we stick with the idea of a child, right? So we have clients who subscribe, right, to anything from, let's say, even children's toys, right? And at first thought, that may sound very strange, but at the same time, if you're a manufacturer of these toys, you really do have that choice. Do you just sell it once, or do you subscribe it over multiple times? Because you can get those back, refurbish the pieces that need to be replaced, right? Repackage them, and then just send them out again, right? And I think from a parent's point of view, and from even a child, you always want the newest stuff. And these things are pretty expensive, right? So, again, I think from the consumer, if we look at the parents here, they can always have the newest toys, the newest bikes, things like that, for the period of time that their kids need it. And then when they're done, they just send it back, and they save money and always have those advantages. And we haven't even really touched upon the sustainability aspect of this, but I think this is a really important aspect where the economy is moving more towards sustainability, right? And companies themselves, right, they want to become more sustainable without greenwashing, right? Just saying that they're doing stuff, but not really doing stuff. And a subscription model actually helps them to do that.
Yeah, and I can see the advantage of this, especially for those people who are a bit more nomadic than myself, and perhaps move from city to city for job to job, and are maybe got a 6-month contract in London, and they'd love to have a bike to roam around, but don't really then want to take the same bike to Australia the next year, or to Europe, and would rather just get a new one when they're there.
Right. Absolutely. And so it definitely fits that model, right? For nomads and digital nomads, et cetera. But also for people that are, just moving to cities for, a certain period of time, everybody that you just mentioned, that also applies to things like furniture, right? But beyond that too, even if you live in a house and have lived there forever, there's seasonal equipment, right? Instead of buying that snowblower that you were thinking about buying, right? Why not just lease it for the next, that's whatever it is, 3 months, 6 months, and then send it back. And then when you send it back, then you can, even with the same company, then you can get the brand new robot lawnmower that you've wanted, lease that for 6 or 9 months, and then send that back if you like. a lot of our clients also have the ability to be able to buy that product at the end of the leasing cycle if people would like. So it's a great way for sort of try before you buy as well.
Mm-hmm. So talk to me about the sort of economics and the mindset of a business that wants to get into leasing products from pure retail. I imagine this has got to be a decision that goes right up to the board level, but not many manufacturers have already got kind of a refurb department. They may get returns, but leasing, they're definitely going to get a significant larger number of returns. But also from a cost perspective, when you sell a product, you're pretty much getting all of your money up front. Whereas when you're leasing a product, there must be a kind of more significant investment because you're going to get small amounts on a monthly basis rather than the upfront fee. So from the sort of the financial and the logistics perspective, what do companies need to think about, and how do they make the numbers add up?
Yeah, I think two main points here, right? I think the decision-making process, you're absolutely right. This definitely has to be something that is thought about and accepted throughout the company. It does take some change. One thing that we've noticed over the last years, right? So Circuly has been around for over 3 years now. And in the first year and a half or so, we noticed a lot of companies, we were talking to them about the reasons why you would do a subscription model at all, right? Whereas in the last year and a half, it's much more of an accepted thing. There's a lot more pilot programs that have been done over the last year or so, for a lot of reasons too. I mean, if you think about the state of the economy and the fact, especially in the UK, people have a little bit less money. They still want all those expensive white goods and things that roll and, greatest kids products that they can afford, things like that, but they don't have the money for it. So to that extent, subscription models have made a lot more sense, both for the end consumer and for these companies to try out. But yeah, it definitely takes some thought there. And if we switch to the economic side, right? So as you mentioned, a lot of these companies, maybe they don't have refurb departments yet, but they do have returns and they do have to replace pieces and things like that. So it's not so much of a invention of a whole new department as it is more of just sort of a switching the purpose of that repair department. And you can actually make it work really well in that I think there is something to be said for the length of time that you rent products out, right? So we tend to say that you should rent it out for at least 3 months up to sort of 2 years, because that makes it so that, the back and forth logistics, actually sending the products, doesn't get to be a pain, right? Yeah, so to that extent, it does seem to make a lot of economic sense.
So I can see some real advantages here for consumers, and especially I'm thinking new parents with a baby, that the first thing they're going to want is a pushchair or a stroller, as the Americans would call it. They're going to want a car seat. They're going to want a whole load of stuff, which literally in 6 months' time, this new baby is going to have outgrown, and they're going to want a whole new load of stuff. So I can see the real advantages of this. How does it work from a financial perspective from the consumer? And what kind of price point of product is it worth doing this on? Obviously, if something's going to be 20 quid, you're just going to go and buy it, hopefully. Right. But is it kind of a £100 product or a £500 product or a £1,000 product? Where does the economics of leasing work for both the consumer and indeed the manufacturer?
Right. Yeah. So I think it very much depends on the industry, right? But if we just name a few, right? We've already talked about e-mobility, right? Mobility in general, kids, children, things like and baby, right? But also sort of furniture, things like that. The price points can be different depending on the industry there. But yeah, I would say probably a couple of £100 and up is sort of a starting point. A lot of our clients have higher end products, which are in the hundreds of pounds or hundreds of euros, up from that all the way up to a Tesla, right? Yeah, I think that more of a starting point. I think a lot of it has to do with the good itself, because it should be something which is durable, which is high quality, which is something that you can sort of, recycle through a number of people over a period of time as well. Having said that, there are a lot of companies out there that make really good quality products, and it rewards you for having higher quality, right? So that's sort of the price point. Yeah.
And talk to me a bit more about Circuly. What do you actually do to facilitate this for businesses?
Yeah. So Circuly is sort of, in short, almost an operating system for a subscription model business, right? Because if we go back to this example of, we've been subscribing to stuff for a long time, right? As a lot of retailers go into this idea of subscribing or offering subscriptions to physical products, what's really been lacking is a really good operating system to make sure that people can rent those products through their website, right? So if we stick with the e-bike example, you would go to an e-bike producer. At this point, all you can do is buy it, right? But again, they see the point. They see there's a lot of money to be made by subscribing these out. So what we offer is our SaaS basically sits and sort of masks their checkout. So that what happens there is that you then have the choice to not only buy it, but be able to subscribe to it. Okay, so that's the checkout aspect. Our checkout is completely white label, so it adopts whatever look and feel you have, right? So there's never this switch from one website to another or anything like that. That's the first aspect, is the checkout. Okay, the second aspect is this operations backend, and that is really important. That's one of the main components which has been missing up until now, right? Because in our operations backend, that's where this e-bike seller would go to handle all of these subscriptions, right? So they do everything from communicate back and forth with the consumer to asset management, right? Figuring out down to the serial number of that iPhone or bike or whatever, exactly what is the history of that, right? How many times have we repaired it? What does that cost? Therefore, what is the profitability, right? All of that there's a lot of tech behind that and a lot of databases and things like that. And that's what people are currently struggling to handle on Google Sheets, right?
Yeah.
Right, which can be a real pain. So there's that operations backend. And then that's the third aspect is this a customer login. And the customer login is really where you as the end consumer would go you'd log in there to communicate with the e-bike producer or whatever, right? And that's where you can communicate with them. And I think that's one thing that I would stress in this too, is that as opposed to just selling a product, right? And I love doing this with people. Sometimes I'll just say, okay, what brand is your pram from? Or where what brand produced that e-bike? And people will be like, actually, I don't really know, because they bought it, let's say 5-6 months ago, right? The relationship with that producer is dead after that point of purchase. Whereas with a subscription, you have this ongoing communication with that producer over long, long periods of time, up to like years, right? Where every single month, the end consumer, yes, they're getting an invoice, but you can also upsell them. You can send them marketing, right? So it's like an ongoing relationship, right? People are invested in it.
So this all sounds really interesting. And I've got one more question before I let you go, and that is kind of on the tech side. People are going to want to know what platforms you can integrate with. Depending on what my e-commerce store is already on, which platforms is it really easy to integrate with, and which take a bit more trouble to get working?
Right, exactly. I mean, I think in short, I can alleviate any sort of fears that are out there. And so Circuly works with pretty much any platform that's out there. Of course, like the really big ones, like sort of Shopify, WooCommerce, Magento, things like that are sort of standards for us. But then there's a number of other ones that we can integrate with as well. And it's not only that, but I think one thing which is important to mention too is that this is an exploding niche, and there are competitors of ours that really they ask their clients to effectively throw out their current tech stack and just use them. Use their shop, use their payment provider, things like that. Right. Whereas that's one thing that we've always seen as extremely important is the fact is retailers are married to their tech stack. They've chosen it because they've wanted that. And it's really hard to get a divorce, so to say. Right. And that's why we sort of slot right in any sort of shop system that you mentioned, right, that they would want, we integrate with. but then also any sort of payment provider, right? Like all the standard ones, they need to be integrated with, and we do that. But not only there, also any sort of CRMs, ERPs, we sort of integrate seamlessly into those as well. So yeah, and I think that is one piece of advice, whether you would go with Circuly or a competitor, absolutely fine, but just make sure that I think long term that you are getting sort of the making sure that you can keep the tech stack that you have, because we've seen that when people try to get rid of their current tech stack, that causes a lot more mayhem in their business than they would have first thought.
Yeah, and I think there's the last thing anyone retailer wants to do, especially if they're going to sort of do it as a small scale test to start with. They just want something that plugs into their existing stack.
Exactly.
So finally, if we've tweaked someone's interest and they want to find out more, how do they get hold of you? Where do they go to find out more about Circuly?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best way is really just to come to our website, right? So that's circuly.io. And yeah, if they come to our website, they can get in touch with us that way. They can also get in touch with me. You can feel free to sort of publish my details along with this video. I'm happy to help them as well. Yeah, that's probably the easiest way.
Brilliant. We'll put the links below the video. So a really interesting conversation, Scott, and I will look forward to maybe leasing my first product in the near future. But
Very good.
thank you so much for your time today.
And thank you for the invitation. Thanks so much, Chris.